Hey, it's Amir Borman. This is the Daily 10 segment of the Talent Tango podcast. I'm here with Arash.
What's up?
And, automation is good, but it's also bad, depending on when everything's a tool,
It's
right?
a
When,
double-edged sword.
where, how you use it. So if you use the wrong tool at the wrong time, you're going to get bad results. And what are we talking about today is a candidate went through multiple rounds of interviews and in the end of the day got rejected.
Yeah, I
And
can read the text. So he actually I had a lot of correspondence via text. So he just said, they didn't bother to respond in person, not even an email, but I just got an automated thanks, but no thanks message from their ATS. Just a common courtesy. The Valley is quite a small place.
Yeah, and it really got us talking internally, there's lots made about we've talked about the experience on the Daily 10, and I think the one thing that we keep going back to, it is a small world, it's a small community. It would have taken just a minute to I mean, you could even have a template email that came out versus coming out from the ATS. I mean, that wasn't I mean, you
Right.
could have just said, "Hey, thanks," whatever it was, there could have been a custom email sent out, especially I think it depends the stage, right? I think if somebody's made it on site, I think they probably have more vested. They're like, "Hey, I wish I could have gotten a little bit info," versus just rejected off the screen, maybe less pissed off.
Yeah, well, I think it's a matter of in this particular instance, this was a higher level position, a manager role, and this candidate had a really good conversation with a counterpart at the company that he was interviewing at. So he felt like, and he kind of even articulated that it might not be the right fit, but he kind of felt like, hey, I connected with this person. I had a real solid conversation. So I think it's a matter of not only the experience, but maintaining your brand. I think we've discussed that too. So, at least from my end, I took the initiative and I sent an email to, the head of talent and said, "Hey, just FYI, this is some feedback I got from a candidate that just went through the interview cycle with you." So he's aware of it. Now it's on his desk to maybe find a way to remedy that and make sure it doesn't happen again. But I think to your point, depending on where you're at in the process, that's only part of it. I think it's also people forget that you're dealing with another person and they have feelings. So making sure that you're cognizant of that. And if you were on the other end of a thanks but no thanks email, it's very impersonal. So automation can still be personalized. So I think it's recognizing, how much personalization you put into automation too.
Yeah, and I think that's where, again, right tool, right time. I think it's super important. I'm all 100% for automating what should not be done manually because it is, it's a time saver, right?
Yeah, sure.
But in the case of, a manager level role, this candidate, while not a fit now, you never know. Maybe you have a director role open in a year or two. Maybe he doesn't hire somebody on his team in his network, and he's like, "Hey, I've got another engineer I can refer. I had a good experience." To me, we're always trying to do the what's the measurable, like what's the definitive data points you can capture to establish some kind of metric, and it's
Right.
like you can't account for the fact that he might not refer somebody out to them just because his experience is bad versus if the experience was and he alluded it's a small town. If his experience was positive, maybe that's look, it doesn't even matter. It's just doing the right thing at the right time is always the best course of action, even if it takes 15, 20 seconds longer.
Yeah, and I think part of it is once you get into the interview cycle, I think some of the processes, because they're automated, internally you don't even know who would handle that communication, right? Because the recruiter obviously is going to get the feedback from the manager, and then it's like, well, should I reach out? Should you reach out? So I think there's a lot of disconnect that can happen. Obviously, most organizations of 50 plus have some internal kind of ATS system that they're using. And obviously, it's easier just to have it say, boom, rejected, and then automatically sends an email to that person. But again, the context within when automation is used, I think is really important to make sure that you're utilizing it at the right time.
Yeah, and like you said, it could be that, all these systems do have automation. Maybe it's making sure that you've spent the time to customize it per role, depending on how high a level it is. There's certain expectations that change for a manager role versus a pure IC role. So I do think some of those things can be accounted for and still leverage automation because you don't I mean, you don't have to physically go send that email, but you do have to make sure that if you're gonna template it, that template fits that particular role versus I've just got a generic rejection template, which everyone kinda then will be like, "All right, well, obviously
Well, and
this."
I think it's very evident when something is a copy and paste when and then when it's not. When it's there was some time taken by this person or this automation tool to at least make me feel like I'm not one of a million. So I think that's the real key with automation is finding a way to make sure that you're still making the individual on the other end feel special because any email, any form of interaction throughout the interview process, you're going to get some sort of reaction. And in this particular case, I think I've luckily established a good relationship with him. But to Amir's point, he might not even refer a candidate to me because he's like, oh, Arash is going to refer him out to this client who I have a bad taste in my mouth. So, even for, a silo recruiter, there's that kind of potential negative impact of not having a good experience.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything siloed anymore. I mean, he probably doesn't have the time or the inclination, but somebody else might go to Glassdoor and write a review and blast them and go because there's a section for the interview process.
Yeah,
Might go to the
exactly.
interview and say, really crummy interview. You just got rejected. Blah, blah. So you don't know
That's very true.
where that ends, and that's why I think for us, we talk about experience a lot, is because the dotted line to the metric is not always there. So it's sometimes doing those harder activities, the little bit more effort activities, where then and then the day, you've done the right thing.
Right.
There's no bad taste, there's always I mean, he's obviously not gonna be happy he's rejected, but no bad taste,
Well, it's
best possible rejection, and again, it depends what stage in the process, how much time was invested. I think to me, I'd be cognizant to go manager level, just used to higher touch, maybe a little bit higher touch.
yeah, and I think it's the delivery, right? I think there's a lot of ways to communicate to people, but
It's
how
DiGiorno.
how things get delivered is a huge impact and again how you make a consumer feel, right? So if you're able to make this person feel like, hey, you know what, they respected me even though they decided that I wasn't a good fit at this point in time, I think once the emotions subdue, you're okay with the process, right? So I think it's something that a lot of people don't necessarily do on any side of this is actually put themselves into the candidate's shoes and say, hey, did I feel good about that process or not. And I think if you the more you can do that with whatever tools you use or don't use, because you could obviously not have anything automated and just send an email and say, "Hey, sorry, rejected." Like that's not positive either. And there's times where you know what, a client doesn't give you feedback, or you know what, their kind of policy is to be very limited with feedback they provide to an external agency and or even directly to the candidate. And you can still just say, "Hey, you know what, we don't provide feedback, except if you're passed on or you're going to the next level." So I think it's very making people aware that context
Yep.
can help them feel better.
Yeah, so I definitely think, again, in this particular case, could have been handled different, but I think overall, generally, I think going back to talking about experience from a couple of, shows ago, I think it's so crucial nowadays. I think with the power of the end user to go and voice their displeasure, you need to know that going into anything, whether you have a dry cleaner, you're a recruiting company, or any other product or service, there is a avenue to voice concern, and you have to build your strategy around experience to make sure that it's as positive as you can keep it.
Yeah, Big Brother is watching, right? And
Well,
so
it's
and
it's it's
and
ju
that's just the way it is now.
it's
I mean, you
social, like, people go on Facebook, it'll be on it'll be somewhere, Glassdoor, Yelp, like, wherever it is, it's gonna be Google reviews, so it's gonna end up someplace. You gotta make sure that you're on the top of the game.
and typically negative over positive is
Most
usually
people, squeaky wheel gets the grease, but, yeah, let us know, like, have you seen, rejections that should have been handled differently, should have been handled better? Listen, subscribe. We're now gonna start keeping track of that. I'm kidding. Alright, see you guys later.